Welcome back, everyone, to a new episode of the Bat Flip Podcast. My name is Damien, here with my co-host Matt and David. Today, we will recap the from Game 3 on through the World Series that saw the Astros win in 6. We've had a free agent already re-signed with his current team, and then we'll jump into our top 11 free agency predictions and our outlook on what the offseason will look like. But before we get to all that, how you doing, Matt?
I'm doing pretty good. Had a pretty good weekend, and I kind of hate to see the baseball season end, but the off season's gonna be exciting too, and we're gonna get a little bit of talking about what's happened this year. Get a little recap on the season, and then get moving forward to the off season and maybe next year. So we'll excited to talk about it. We'll have a good time. How's everything going? How's everything going, David?
It's going all right. I missed last week, I know, but we've had some technical difficulties already this week trying to get it to work, but I think we'll be good this time. It's been a rather fun, start to the off season already. And as a Cubs fan, I'm definitely looking forward to, the players making moves. There's a lot of really interesting free agents cropping up. Also, congrats to the Astros on winning the World Series. And before we get started on kind of that World Series recap, how you doing, Damien?
We'd do better if this wasn't our fifth time trying to record this tonight already, it seems like. But it was a good weekend overall. Got to see the Alabama Crimson Tide lose to LSU Tigers, so that's a good one. Not see Alabama in the playoffs, but let's go ahead and jump over to the Astros World Series win. When we ended our recording last time, we were in the middle of Game 3. The Astros were leading 4-0. The Phillies were leading 4-0 in Game 3. The Phillies ended up getting 3 more in the bottom of the 5th to dominate the rest of that game, 7-0. And then seems like the momentum was in the Phillies side. They were leading the series 2-1, had the next 2 at home, and then Christian Javier happened to them.
Yeah, that Game 4 no-hitter was incredible. Christian Javier came out. He did this in the regular season against the Yankees too. I think he was the same guy that started their combined no-hitter in the regular season, but he came out, just dominated. I couldn't touch his fastball. He's got a great breaking ball as well. Pitched great. Gave him a couple walks. That was it. Then the bullpen came in and closed it out. Finishing Game 4, and the Astros did the first no-hitter in the World Series since Don Larson's perfect game, and it was actually the first no-hitter in the postseason since Roy Halladay's no-hitter in, I believe it was 2010 or 2011. He threw his no-hitter for the Phillies. So definitely interesting Game 4. And I really thought that was kind of the turning point in this series.
It absolutely was. We talked about how the Phillies needed their big bats to carry them through this postseason, the big bats in the starting pitching. And, when they started getting shut down by that no-hitter, Kyle Schwarber said he didn't give a shit, but, it really mattered because Bryce Harper didn't really do anything the rest of the way. It seemed like the Phillies were kind of on their heels after that. And, we saw Game 5 end with Real Muto flying out to center field with a really great catch from Chas McCormick. It really did kind of clinch it for the Astros at that point. I don't think anybody really believed the Phillies were going to come back. The Astros were such a good team, so complete. We knew that it was going to require magic in Philadelphia, right? And they needed to steal one in that Astros series in those first 2 games, and they did. But we also said that if Houston won any games in Philadelphia, that was going to be it. And their first win in Philadelphia, which was Philadelphia's first loss in the postseason at home, was a no-hitter. So talk about taking the wind out of your sails there.
Yeah, I mean, it really did take the wind out of their sails. And then in Game 5, they had a close game. They were battling. It was 3-2 in the 9th inning, and then JT Realmuto hits one that looked like it should have got out, but it was going to bounce off the wall and probably for at least a triple. And Chas McCormick made a great running, jumping catch against the wall. I think it was the first or second out in the 9th inning in a 1-run game, and with Bryce Harper coming up, if that runner was on third and that out gets taken by Chas McCormick, and now that really took the wind even out of the sails for that rest of that game, and really felt like the final knockout blow heading into Game 6 in Houston, where Zach Wheeler was dominating, and then Rob Thompson pulled him, and then Yordan Alvarez hit one of the biggest home runs we'll see.
Yeah, this just seemed to me like a scenario where Rob Thompson kind of had the way he was managing all their postseason games was they'd get their starter through 4 or 5 innings, and then they'd go to their bullpen. And when their bullpen came in, they they just they had some good luck with the same 3 or 4 guys. They had Alvarado would come in. They'd have Zach Eflin, David Robertson, and Sir Anthony Dominguez. And honestly, out of those guys, like I think that Alvarado, when he's got command, is really really good, and Dominguez is really really good. But some of the other guys in that were they had a little bit of good fortune in the postseason too in some ways. But you kind of look at you look at the way that the series unfolded, and if you throw those guys out there 4, 5, 6 games in a row, a team starts to see them and starts to time them up a little bit better. And especially a guy like Alvarado, who he's throwing really hard. He's kind of funky. He's kind of weird. Uh, that really hard sinker, and then the cutter that's in the low 90s. And Yordan Alvarez saw that like almost every single game, so he kind of knew what to look for. Went up there, hit an absolute like destroyed a baseball, and it was 450 foot straightaway center. It was like 115 miles an hour off the bat, just absolutely vaporized the baseball. And I mean that was it. That was kind of like last year's Jorge Soler home run. That was really from that moment you knew that the Phillies were as good as they've been, and as much as they fought this postseason. You knew they were not going to come back from that, even though it was just a 3-1 game.
Yeah, and Jeremy Pena ultimately gets awarded World Series MVP. He hit 400 in the World Series with a 600 slugging, a big home run, couple of doubles. I made a bit of a long-winded point in our previous attempt at recording. I'll try to narrow it down a little bit. I kind of think that this is a bit of a snub on Framber Valdez, who threw 2 really good starts against this Phillies lineup, 18 strikeouts in 12 innings here in the World Series. He was just really, really strong. I kind of think that they robbed him a little bit, and that he probably could have been him. But you can't give an MVP award to an entire pitching staff, where I think it's the Astros pitching staff, picking up the most valuable players. They shut down a very, very relentless Phillies offense for 6 games.
Yeah, and then how bad do we look for all doubting Jeremy Pena to begin the season when they lost Carlos Correa? I think I even said that they'd be a wild card team because of that, and he comes back and has a potential Rookie of the Year season if it wasn't for Julio Rodriguez and Adley Rutschman, and then backs that up by having an ALCS MVP award and now a World Series MVP award where he hit 400. It's Jeremy Pena is a young star in this game that seems like the Astros are just able to pick up right where they left off with that. But another good thing for the Astros winning is that Dusty Baker finally gets his World Series win. I mean, he's been there twice before. I think it was 2002 with the Giants, and then with the Astros last year. But he's had so many heartbreaking losses in the postseason, and at 73 to finally get his World Series ring, it was a well received around the league.
Yeah, for sure, and it's really cool to see him get that win finally. He is a guy who's been around forever. He's been managing for 25 years, and it'd be one thing if he'd managed for 25 years and he had never been close. But they've endured so many heartbreaking losses with him. As a manager, I mean, he was the manager in 2002 in the World Series for the Giants when they blew that big lead in Game 6, and then in Game 7 lost in 7. He was the manager of the 2003 Cubs when they dropped the when they had the Steve Bartman play and had the collapse in the NLCS. He was the manager last year for the Astros when they won 100 games, I believe, and I think they won over 100 games, and then they lost in the World Series to a team that won 88 games. I mean, he's been so close so many times, and it was cool to see him finally finally get that win. And I mean, it's not like he had never made his mistakes. I mean, he's left pitchers out there too long a few times, Mark Pryor, and then it kind of stinks to It stunk to see him lose. It's so many close situations so many times, and then he finally gets it done. Happy for him. He was a long time great player, in the big leagues too, and it's really cool to see.
Well, let's go ahead and transition over to our start of the free agency period. It really opens on Thursday, but in this lull period, you're able to talk to your former team, and that's what Edwin Diaz was able to do. Re-signed with the New York Mets on a 5-year, $102 million deal. Has an opt-out after 3 years, and then that first 3 years has a full no-trade clause. And there's a potential for a 6th-year option that I'm not quite sure the numbers have been reported on what that would be money-wise.
This is a huge deal, but look at it this way, right? This is a record-setting deal because the previous record holder for a reliever contract in total money was Aroldis Chapman at $85 million. This is solidly over that and really sets the market, especially because Edwin Diaz was the best reliever in baseball last year. But it's kind of my belief that you can't put a price on the trumpets. The atmosphere in the Mets field on those game nights when Edwin Diaz came in was absolutely electric. The ability to, have that as the potential end of the game weapon, and having Edwin Diaz really step up into that role of the kind of dominant shutdown closer with the hardcore entrance in New York. I mean, that's really something we haven't seen since Mariano Rivera with Enter Sandman. So having that kind of presence in the back end of the bullpen it's not traditional, but it's something that can absolutely be a huge difference in the regular season when you need to win the baseball game. The Mets won 101 games this year, in large part due to Edwin Diaz's brilliance in the closer position. I don't know that spending $100 million on a reliever is necessarily what the standard books say these days, but it seems like this is a good move for the Mets to keep that kind of organization together and trying to win.
Yeah, and I'll kind of what you said with the atmosphere and stuff, and when he comes to the game. I mean, $100 million for a reliever in a vacuum is just a terrible contract. I mean, that's the stupidest thing you could do. $100 million. I mean, relievers are volatile. I mean, you remember like 2 years ago, Edwin Diaz had like a 4.50 ERA, and the Mets fans were ready to run him out of town. So but at the same time, the Mets don't care about money. I mean, if it's a bad contract, they don't care. They'll just eat it. And if it turns out that way, and right now he's the best reliever in baseball. So, I mean, if he continues that, it's obviously a good contract. But it's very risky to sign a guy to that. But like I say, you don't really have that much risk when you just are going to ignore it if it's a bad contract and just spend more. So, I think Steve Cohen, also he kind of runs the team because he's a fan. I mean, he runs it like he's a fan, and a lot of times, people who are fans of a team, they pick that's the type of stuff they care about. As much as signing a guy to an appropriately valued contract is, hey, this is really fun. I'm enjoying seeing Edwin Diaz come in. The atmosphere's great when he comes in. It's a big event. And I don't mean to down this from a baseball standpoint, because I think he's a great reliever. And if any reliever is worth $100 million contract, it probably is Edwin Diaz this year. I mean, he was incredible. His stuff is great. His stuff has been really good, even when he struggled the last few years. It's just been some of it's been kind of random, like home run luck and stuff. But I expect him to continue to be really, really good. But definitely an interesting contract. We'll see. We'll see how it turns out. It could end up being a horrible value just because of the volatility of relievers. But like I say, I don't think the Mets really care if it does end up that way. So,
yeah, Steve Cohen doesn't care. He has plenty of money to make that work. But let's go ahead and transition over and start with our predictions, because I know this is probably going to be more the long-winded segment. We have a list of guys here that we'll start from top to bottom with one being Aaron Judge. Obviously is with the New York Yankees, or was with the New York Yankees last year. David, where do you have Aaron Judge going, for how many years and how many millions of dollars?
All right, so we'll get into the specifics, but I do want to give my thought process. I believe Aaron Judge is destined for really only two places. I think there's a few outside opportunities for the big market teams to jump in, but ultimately I've got Judge deciding between making a trip to the West Coast in San Francisco and staying in New York with the Yankees. And my settled mindset was that he'll stick with the Giants, or he'll go to the Giants, sorry, and abandon the Yankees, coming off of the booing in the postseason, which seemed a little unnecessary. I mean, Aaron Judge is the kind of guy who's going to go through stretches where he hits a homer every game, and then he's going to go through a stretch of games where he strikes out a lot. And that's just the player he is. But he just put on one of the greatest seasons we've ever seen. So I've got him at 8 years, $340 million. I think it'll be in that three. We saw Corey Seager get like 320, 330 last year. I think Judge has to surpass that. But Seager went for 10 years, so I think Judge can get that in 8 years. I don't know if any teams are going to be willing to go to 9 or 10 for a 30-year-old with a big body and a big strikeout problem, but with all the upside in the world for Aaron Judge, he's going to be worth that money. It's just going to be a matter of which team I think is willing to shell out the dough.
Yeah, I think I think he stays with the Yankees. I went with 8 years, $320 million. A few reasons for that. The first thing is that I think that I know that there was a lot made out of before the season. He was unhappy with how the Yankees kind of released his the details of the extension they were trying to give him, and then and then like you say, maybe he wasn't very happy with how the fans of the Yankees fans treated him in the playoffs. But I honestly I don't know if the Yankees fans' treatment of him in the playoffs really matters that much in this case. I think that Judge understood that he was striking out a ton in the playoffs, and he understands they're frustrated and they're passionate fans. I think he's embraced that. He's been there long enough to know that that's just the way Yankees fans are. And when he hits his 62nd home run of the year, they're all absolutely going bonkers for him. So I think he gets the kind of risk reward of that. He's very good in that market. Now the thing about Judge is that I think the Yankees are going to be desperate to bring him back now. There was so much made out of them not locking him up, and before the season, and I think that his value is. I think other teams are not going to value him as highly as the Yankees are because of that. I think that some of the contract offers are going to be lower than what people kind of expect them to be because he is 31 years old this year, and I know that he just had a historic season, and he's been a great player every year. It's not just, I mean, this was obviously his peak year, but he's been great every single year. But he's also, like you said, he's 31. He's a big-bodied guy, and he's still, and I know that he's been healthy. He was healthy this year, and he was healthy last year, but he had a lot of injury issues in the past too. And you can't just completely throw those out the window, even though he's put up two, very healthy years in a row. For a guy at his size and his skill set, that you do kind of have to factor that in a little bit. But so I think that other teams are going to value him highly. I think other teams are probably going to offer in that $300 million range for 8 years. But I think the Yankees are just going to go. They're gonna go above and beyond. And to be honest, when it comes to Yankees losing a star franchise player like Judge, I'll believe it when I see it. I mean, that's kind of the way things are with the Yankees. I mean, they don't lose players like this very often to other teams. So I'll believe it when I see it.
Yeah, that's exactly pretty much what I was going to say right there at the end, is that the reason I have Aaron Judge also going back to the Yankees, I have him going in 9 years, $360 million. I think the Giants are a real threat. I think that they are going to push in that 8-year range, maybe into that 9-year range, might be the reason why they have to do it. But I just don't think that Brian Cashman and the Yankees can afford to let Judge walk right now. Like after everything that happened in the offseason last year, and then Judge betting on himself, having the amazing season he did, and then, the way the season ended and the backlash that you were already getting for Cashman, potentially coming back, which it's pretty much confirmed that he's coming back as that, keeping Aaron Boone, you can't allow Aaron Judge to walk out the door right after all of that happens. Like New York would blow up. Like the New York media would eat that for lunch every single day, and it would be consistent questions throughout the rest of the season. This next upcoming season, and the length of that contract of why didn't you sign Aaron Judge, or why didn't you re-sign him if he goes on and has a good next couple years. And I just don't think Brian Cashman can afford to let that happen right now with already being on thin ice as it is. But speaking of New York and going over to the Mets, and an owner that we just talked about is not afraid to spend money and not afraid to make sure he gets their guy, we'll go with Jacob deGrom, and we'll go ahead and start with you, Matt. Where do you have Jacob deGrom going?
So I have Jacob deGrom going back to the Mets. I think that as I mentioned earlier, Steve Cohen runs the team like a fan, because that's, at the end of the day, that's what he is. That's why he's the owner. He bought the team because he's a Mets fan, and he does. Fans typically of teams they're biased to their own players, and they don't want their players to leave, even if it makes sense for them to go somewhere else, and for them to bring in guys that are maybe better fits, or they spread the money around a little bit or something else. But I think he's going to come back to I think he's going to go back to the Mets. And I just can't imagine him. I can't imagine him walking away from there with the amount of money that I think Steve Cohen will offer him, and the amount of love he's gotten from Mets fans. I do have him at only a 3-year deal, but 145 million. I think he signed something similar to what Scherzer did last year, with just a little bit higher AAV. And I think that the reason is, he's 35 years old, and that that injury history, just it's going to be hard for teams to offer him more than three, maybe 4 years. But I could see a team going to 5 or 6 if they are going to 5 years if the AAV was a lot lower. But I really think it's going to be something like a 3-year, maybe a 4-year deal, and just a super high, AAV. And because, I mean, you're talking about a guy who hasn't pitched a full year in 3 years, even though when he has pitched, he's been unbelievable. Um, a guy who hasn't pitched a full year in 3 years, and the type of pitcher he is, doesn't really make you think he's gonna just all of a sudden start pitching, 200 innings again. And I think he's a guy who's probably going to be a 150, 160 innings a year guy. And while he's going to be putting up insane numbers, there's that risk that it's less than that. So I definitely think 3 years, 145 million, and I'll be surprised if he's not back with the Mets next year.
Yeah, for me, I just don't know. I mean, if he was going to stay with the Mets, why hasn't it happened? Right? Like, we talked about him saying before the last, or in last offseason and in spring training, I'm going to opt out after this year. Well, if Steve Cohen was really so adamant on making sure that Jacob deGrom stays, he would have gone and thrown so much money at him that, deGrom didn't have to opt out there. And then we've already seen the rumblings that they were going to make Diaz and Nimmo the 2 priority free agents from the Mets. And I don't feel like you say that and you don't include Jacob deGrom in there. Like, it's kind of weird that the report is, they're going to make Diaz and Nimmo the guys, really. Like, they're going to prioritize from the team. I just feel like there might be some bad blood there with behind the scenes that we just aren't quite seeing. And a team that really surprised me last year with how aggressive they were. And then I really wasn't thinking about it, and they were kind of linked today a little bit, and it kind of opened my eyes and made me think about it. And when I was doing these predictions earlier, it kind of made a lot of sense that they are going to go in this direction and be in on it. And I have that being the Texas Rangers being in on Jacob deGrom. They made the aggressive move last year for Seager and Semien and Calhoun and John Gray. There's the rumblings that they want to be in on Kershaw. We'll see what happens there. I mean, Kershaw said that he'll either sign with Texas or the Dodgers on a 1-year deal. But, I mean, you'll make room for Kershaw if that happens. But if you have a chance to go get Jacob deGrom, Chris Young's going to want to be aggressive. They just hired Bruce Bochy. They're going to be there to win. They're not there for a rebuild and a slow build. They're there to be aggressive and win now. And, if you go to 5 years for Jacob deGrom, and I have it at $225 million because they're going to have to overpay to get him. Like, I just think that the Rangers are going to be aggressive on that. And if you are as serious as you are as trying to compete in that division with the Astros, with the Mariners rotation that we've seen, you never know about the Angels. They have the talent, but can they just stop being stupid eventually? You're going to have to make some big moves and be that team needs a lot. And I think DeGrom's right at the top of the list.
Yeah, so this is my least confident prediction out of all of them, I think, and it's maybe the most obvious pick. The reason I don't like the Rangers as a pick is they do spring in Arizona, and DeGrom has said he wants to do spring in Florida. He would probably even rather play in Florida. The issue being there that the Marlins and the Rays aren't going to sign Jacob DeGrom. So, that's a hometown thing. That's not a baseball thing. From a baseball perspective, there's a lot of teams that I could see picking up DeGrom, right? I think the Yankees could spend in the rotation if Aaron Judge walks. The Rangers are a team that would spend in the rotation. The Cubs are a team that would spend in the rotation. The Red Sox are always a threat in big market teams, and their pitching last year was really suspect and could be transformed by a player like Jacob deGrom. There's the Mariners, who are always sneaky here, although they did just spend money on their rotation the last couple of the deadline in the offseason. So the Dodgers are always going to be one of those teams to watch out for, especially if Clayton Kershaw walks this offseason. But I'm just going to have him going back to the Mets, man. But he's going to set an AAV record. Whether that deal is 3, 4, or 5 years, you can pencil it in at $45 million or more. It's just a matter of what team is going to take on the injury risk to have the best player on your team or best pitcher in the league on your team. I know I don't think Steve Cohen's going to plan on letting him get away, but if as a Cubs fan, he's my number one. I want him more than any of the other players available because he's such a transformative pitcher for your rotation. So what I think is going to happen. There you go.
Well, let's stay in the starting pitching market, and we'll go over to San Francisco Giants left-hander Carlos Rodon. 30-year-old. He's not going to have a qualifying offer attached to him, if I believe. Didn't he have that last year, or did he not?
Don't think he got a qualifying offer from the White Sox.
So maybe he will have a qualifying offer attached to him.
Yes, he will.
Okay. So qualifying offer guy, 30 years old, left-handers, injury history. David, where do you have Carlos Rodon going?
This is a tough one. I think Carlos Rodon's going to go to one of those teams that needs that starting pitching help, but is also willing to go up in the years and the AAV. He's in the same boat as Gausman, Robbie Ray, and others from last year, where he's probably going to sign a 5 or a 6 year deal in that $115 to $150 million range. So I think somebody's going to have to pay up to really acquire him. I went with the Orioles because the Orioles are going to need pitching to give themselves an opportunity with that young core coming up. I think it's a really good chance for them to go ahead and strike, especially while they have a top 10 protected pick. Or actually, they don't anymore. But they would still be willing to, I think, give up that first-round pick because they're going to be going for it finally. So the Orioles making a splash, I think he's going to have to go over 150, but I was trying to kind of mimic the John Lester deal from a few years ago, like what team would be willing to throw in their John Lester, and so I felt like the Orioles giving Carlos Rodon the John Lester deal would kind of make some sense there. So I have 6 years, 160. But again, he's a very fluid type of player, and I see him going to a team wanting to step up into contention like the Blue Jays did last year and the Mariners as well with Robbie Ray and Kevin Gausman.
Yeah, and I think I would love to see him end up with the Orioles. I think the Orioles would be a fun team for a guy like that. They haven't had a pitcher at Carlos Rodon's caliber in many years, and but the only thing that worries me about the Orioles would be the fact that they're not gonna spend at a super high payroll, and he's an injury risk to the point of where you worry about locking a guy up for 6 years with that kind of injury risk. So, but I went with the Cardinals, and 5 years, 140. I think that the Cardinals desperately needs some more starting pitching. This year, if you remember, they had to trade for, Quintana, who they've lost now to free agency, and Jordan Montgomery at the deadline. Wainwright's coming back next year, but he's another year older, and I just don't know if he's that reliable. And you got like Flaherty's not really that reliable because of injury, and even when he has pitched, he hasn't been all that effective. And then you've got like you got Miles Michaelis still there. That's just kind of you just don't expect these guys to have the type of seasons that you could possibly get from Carlos Rodon. They don't really have a true like number one type. And when Rodon's healthy, the last 2 years he has been more than a number one. He's been one of the best pitchers in baseball the last 2 years, but that injury risk is enormous. I know that the Cardinals have been talking about increasing payroll a little bit and not being quite as afraid to spend this offseason. And I think that this might be where they put a lot of that money into. So I got him going to the Cardinals for 5 years, 140.
Yeah, for Rodon, for me, I really, really, really wanted to put the Angels here. Like, he makes a ton of sense for them, but I just couldn't believe that they're going to do that on top of all the other contracts that they have on the books right now, and make that big of a splash in free agency. It's more likely they'll go for the 1 or 2 year deals. For Rodon, I put that he was going to go back to the AL Central, but this time with the Minnesota Twins. We talk so much about the Twins' rotation issues this year. They brought back Sonny Gray, but they've lost Chris Paddock for most of the year next year, if not the entire season. Tyler Mahle has had his shoulder issues. He's had that the last couple years as well. So can he be reliable? They've let go of Dylan Bundy, Chris Archer. I know you had Joe Ryan, played a big part last year and was really good. But if they want to step up into contention against the White Sox team, who will probably be aggressive and spend some money this offseason, and then against that Guardians team that we talk so much about with the young pitching staff and the young team they have overall, I went with the Twins being aggressive. It's an out of left field move that they are not usually this aggressive with, but who saw them signing Carlos Correa last year? I understand that was a shorter term deal with opt outs to really fit what he was doing, but nobody predicted that they'd be in on that. I just think it makes sense that they go in on the starting pitching in the high up starting pitching market. So I have the Twins signing him for a 5-year, $150 million, $30 million AAV. I think they're going to have to spend up a little bit more than what the market would normally be for a guy like Rodon.
I really like the Twins to Rodon, by the way. That's a good little pairing. I think that's good.
Yeah, that would be fun.
So let's go ahead and jump over to the shortstop market now, since our next 4 or 5 will be in that one. And we'll go ahead and start with who people could say there's a 1A, 1B here, but we'll go ahead and start with Trey Turner. And Matt, you and I agree on where we think Trey Turner is going to go, and I think we have pretty similar deals.
Yeah, so you can call me a homer, but I think Trey Turner. Honestly, and this is a shot in the dark type pick. But the Braves really, really need a shortstop. They're going to need one of the guys that are up here, and I think Trey Turner makes the most sense. The Braves really need a little bit more contact in that lineup. That is, because they've really struggled with that obviously they've been a great team, but they go through phases where they've got just so many strikeouts in that lineup, it gets really difficult to. They go through some slumps from that. And, Trey Turner's a guy who's going to make a lot of contact. He's got some power too. He can run. I think that the Braves they've spent a lot of talk about increasing payroll more and being up into the top 5 in payroll this year. It's the direct quote that the president of the Braves said. They're going to be top 5 payroll, so you're going to spend it somewhere. And I think that when you look at, what they would potentially pay, we'll talk about Dansby Swanson here in a few minutes, but they would potentially pay him the extra, $8 to $10 million it's going to take to get Trey Turner over Dansby, I think is worth it. And I think that the Braves would possibly cash in a little bit of that money that they're saving on, having all these team friendly deals and stuff on getting a guy like Trey Turner. Eventually he could, slide over to second base if you needed him to. At some point, that'll be 4 or 5 years from now, probably. But I really like Trey Turner, and he's also wanted to play on the East Coast. He's from Florida originally, and he played at NC State in college, so Atlanta's kind of right in between there. It makes a lot of sense to me. So I think that the Braves might go after Trey Turner, and I got him at 8 years, $260 million. And I think it'll be interesting. I would be very excited about that if it happened as a Braves fan, but kind of a shot in the dark. So
Yeah, and right before David jumps in, I have him to the Braves at 8 years for 250, so just $10 million difference there, and for me between our deals. But go ahead, David.
Yeah, no. So I think that works out nicely that y'all both had him there. So I'll go ahead and break down even just the shortstops in general. I think it's a pretty clear. There's like 5 teams, maybe 6, that are going to be hunting for these shortstops. Right? You've got the Dodgers, the Braves, who are losing a shortstop. You've got the Cardinals, the Phillies, the Cubs, who are hunting a shortstop to push themselves into the hunt, and then. And did I not say one? I think the Braves. I'm lost. Oh man. Phillies, Dodgers, Cubs, Braves, Cardinals, Red Sox. 6 teams. There you go. So Red Sox were the other team that lost one, and I think they'll be involved. It's going to be a bidding war, is the thing, right? I think these shortstops are going to bid against each other. They're going to try to drive up the price for each other. And I think Trey Turner is the best player of these 4 available. Now, in that case, that Trey Turner is probably also going to be the most expensive player going. Now, Carlos Correa is probably going to want the biggest contract, but I think you could probably reason that Carlos Correa will get the biggest contract too, since he's not bound by the qualifying offer and the other 3 will be. That being said, Trey Turner's still the best player. So I'm going to stick Trey Turner with the highest contract of these. I think it's totally possible that Carlos Correa beats that, but it's going to get down to a bidding war and who's going to want to be the most aggressive. Therefore, I went with the Phillies going for Trey Turner. It's kind of getting rumored now, which I wasn't even thinking about that when I was doing this. I was just like, all right, which teams need a shortstop? All right, it's these teams. Who's going to be the most aggressive? Well, the Phillies just lost the World Series. So the Phillies are going to be the most aggressive. They're going to be the one going hardest after Trey Turner, which that was my logic. 8 years, $300 million is what I've got it. It could even get higher than that. I think these 4 deals are going to be probably the 4 most overpay feeling deals for these players. But I think the one that'll be the closest to a reasonable deal will be the Trey Turner deal, because he's a really good player, and the stolen base is going to come back in a big way with the pitch clock going out. So he may steal like 60, 70 bases next year just because he'll have more opportunities to steal with the limited pickoff moves.
Man, I can't wait for Adam to listen to this episode. Little inside joke for David there. But yeah, I mean, it makes a ton of sense, and we'll just go ahead and continue on with the shortstop conversation. And the other guy you mentioned there that's going to be in the battle for the biggest contract in that shortstop market, and that's Carlos Correa. You mentioned he's a year younger. He's not going to have the qualifying offer attached because he had it last year. And he's arguably the best out of the 4 or 5 out there. So where do you guys have Carlos Correa going? I guess we'll go ahead and just start with David. Or maybe Matt.
Yeah, so I have Carlos Correa going to the Dodgers. And the reason is because I have Trey Turner not going back to the Dodgers, so they have a vacancy there. And I think Carlos Correa is just going to go wherever he gets paid the most. I think that, you kind of looked at last year. That's kind of what happened with the Twins. He wanted to take that, he didn't like the contract offers he was getting, and he wanted a high AAV and to bet on himself for a year, come back without a qualifying offer. I think he's about, getting paid. And I think that the 2 teams that will just pay whatever it takes are for a player are the Mets and the Dodgers, and the Mets already have a shortstop that's locked up to an enormous contract. So the Dodgers are the team that'll need a shortstop, and they will pay for him, and they'll pay him $326 million for 10 years because he wants to beat Corey Seager by $1 million. So there you go. I think it's the Dodgers.
Yeah, I also have him hitting the Dodgers. And this is a tough one because I think Correa to the Cubs makes a lot of sense if the Cubs want to prioritize the player that does not have the qualifying offer. In that case, I would also think that the Braves could prioritize him as they would lose a first-round pick. So it's one of those things, or a second-round pick, but it'll be a worse second-round pick. It's just it's a tough one because I think Correa is probably the 3rd best shortstop available right now, but he's also got, more upside. He's a bigger guy. So theoretically you could think about him pulling a Manny Machado, moving to third base and kind of stepping up his power game a little bit. That's kind of how I've envisioned it. The Dodgers probably have 1 or 2 more years of Justin Turner, and he doesn't even always play third base that often. So, the Dodgers have that flexibility on the infield anyway. The Cubs have a need at both, middle infield and third base, where, Patrick Wisdom isn't going to cut it. So, between those two, I went with the Dodgers just because I think they'll be willing to go more in the years, because they were willing to go for a longer term deal with Freddie Freeman. They've got Mookie Betts locked up for a long time. Adding another long-term contract doesn't hurt the Dodgers because they know what they want to lock up.
Yeah, and for me, I have a hard time feeling like the Dodgers are going to play in the upper end of the shortstop market unless it's Trey Turner. And even then, I don't think that that's a thing, because they would have already done it by now. With signing other people to an extension, Trey Turner's talked that he would sign an extension with them before, and it didn't happen. So for me, I have Correa going to the Cubs, 10 years, $330 million. He talked about wanting to set the AAV record. I mean, for a shortstop, Seager did it at 10 years, 325 last year. Correa's not going to have the qualifying offer attached to him now. I know he is going to be a year older, but he's still only 28. Like 10 years only takes him to age 38. There was some rumblings last year about Correa to the Cubs being, a thing. I mean, he had dropped some hints at it before as well. And he's not going to be a qualifying offer guy now. I mean, I know we keep saying that, but it's a big, big deal for, these teams that are right there in the middle and ready to kind of be a competing team again, but not quite ready to give up the draft picks to make that happen. And I just think it makes a lot of sense for them to do that, especially after the rumblings from this last year. And I just don't think that the Dodgers are going to be able to play or will be willing to play on that market with other options available.
I'm not entirely sure whether the Cubs are going to go for a higher term deal or higher length deal in terms of time.
I mean, maybe not, but they should be the ones to do it. They're a big market team, and they have nobody locked up. Like, I mean, I know you have Seiya, but for 4 more years,
Yeah.
like, you have nobody on long-term financial commitments.
Well, the problem is that Jed Hoyer has talked at length about mitigating the long-term risk. To where I think the Cubs are going to be like, if the Cubs are involved in the DeGrom sweepstakes, for example, they'll be in it 3 years, but I don't think they'll be willing to go to 5, which is what I think it'll take to sign DeGrom. I don't know that they'll be willing to go to 10 for Correa when they could potentially get a Trey Turner or a Xander Bogaerts for fewer years for maybe a little more money per year. I think the Cubs would rather spend more at the front end of these contracts rather than on the back end of those deals when these players are hitting, their late 30s. It just seems like that's the way the Cubs are trending. Ultimately, if that's what it took to sign him and they signed him, I certainly would not have any complaints. But just trying to read into the GM speak that I've heard floating around, I just don't know that they'll go 10 years. If they do, I'm down. Let's do it. I'll buy my Correa jersey tomorrow, but the 10-year deal for the Cubs seems a little bit. I just don't know if they're going to do it.
So just we'll move on to our next guy, but I want to bring this onto this conversation because it might allow you to express more into it. Correa's 28. We have him going. All of us have him going for a 10-year deal. You have Xander Bogaerts going for 7 years to the Cubs. I know it is less. Actually, you have him for more AAV than the Carlos Correa deal. Why would it be that they wouldn't sign? I mean, it's not much. I mean, you have it by $500,000 or something AAV wise. Why would it be that the Cubs would sign a 30-year-old who's 2 years older to only a 1 year?
3 years.
It is 3 years. But at the end of the deal, it will only be a 1 year age difference. Why would you have him going for that over Correa?
Now it's just it was a gut feeling thing when I was doing the sheet, but at the same time, my thought process is that the Cubs need a lot more than just a singular shortstop, and their plans and their outlook may dictate that Correa is a little more volatile and Bogaerts is a little more reliable, just based on the hit tool, where Bogaerts is an elite 95th percentile hit tool. Correa's hit tool is more like 60, 70th percentile. And he's kind of prone to some slumps, prone to some injuries, and Bogarts is out there every day. He's really been one of the more reliable players the last 5 or 6 years. Bogarts is by no means my favorite player. I think him losing out on isolated power over the last couple of years gives me some big pause. And honestly, I kind of feel like this might be the worst case scenario for the Cubs. But I do think them grabbing Bogarts or Swanson is more likely than them going to 10 years on one of the other guys. If they can get one of the other guys for 8 years, I think they'd be more interested. And I know that Correa from 10 years from now will be like the same age as Bogarts 8 years from now. But I don't know. It's one of those things where I think the Cubs are trying to operate with this kind of new age mindset of we don't want to get ourselves locked down for more than 7 years. And rumor had it that they tried to get Correa last year for 7 years. How much of this is Jason Hayward scaring them, whom they signed at 26? I don't know, but it's just something about the stability of Xander Bogaerts kind of called to me, and that would be the way they go. Because Dansby Swanson, as we'll get to, is probably one of the more volatile of these 4 shortstops. And it'll be, if you're trying to spend your money and mitigate risk, I think the Cubs are maybe wisest to spend on Bogaerts, but also that could in itself bring on more risk.
Yeah. So, for that, I had the Cardinals going for Xander at 5 years, $150 million. Feels like they want to be on the shortstop market. Don't know if they're going to quite be able to compete on the Turner and Correa level. And then once you look at the Bogarts Swanson, I feel like Bogarts is sort of the guy that kind of just fits what they do better. I mean, I know Dansby's a lot better defender, and then their big thing is infield defense and being really solid. But I just feel like for some reason Xander kind of calls to me as the guy that fits better with the Cardinals. And we'll talk a little bit why between the two there, why I had Dansby going somewhere else. But Matt, where do you have Xander Bogaerts going?
Yeah, I have him go to the Phillies. I think he's a good fit there because they, they're a team that doesn't really care quite as much about defense, it seems. I mean, they just signed Castellanos and Schwarber in the same offseason. And I think that the type of team they're trying to be is they're going to mash and they're going to get pitchers who don't give up grounders and strike people out. And I think that, Xander Bogaerts kind of fits into that mold a little bit. He's not as bad of a defender, I think, as people think he is, but he's not a fantastic defender, but yeah, I mean, I think he's a good bat, and I got him going 6 years, 180. I think that would be a pretty solid contract for him. I've always been a huge fan of Xander Bogaerts, and I think he's very, very, very underrated. So I'll be very unhappy if he winds up with the Phillies in the Braves division. But I know the Phillies are looking for a shortstop, and I definitely think he's one that would be that kind of fits the mold there.
Yeah, so we'll transition over and then staying in that division with the Braves' former shortstop. Where do you see Dansby Swanson going, and where his fit is?
Yeah, so I have Dansby Swanson go to the Cubs. It's kind of been one of the places that he might have on his mind if he doesn't wind up back in Atlanta. I think he wants to go back to Atlanta, but I think his wife or his fiance, I think he got married. They've gotten married by now, but anyway, she's from Chicago. I think he's a guy who embraces the cities like Atlanta, Chicago, the bigger market. And I think I think the Cubs would be willing to pay him more. I think the Braves are going to be very hesitant to pay him, what some other teams probably will. And I think it's for good reason. I'm very, very, very down on him long term compared to a lot of people. I think he's such a swing and miss player. He's had 1 year where he was really good at the plate, and that was this year. And he had like a 360 BABIP this year. I know the underlying metrics are pretty good for him, but his main skill is defense, and he just had a career year defensively, and that's not a skill that can carry you into your 30s very well. And he's 29 years old, so that is in his favor. He's not on the wrong side of 30 yet, but I think that a team will want to snatch him up and bring him in as a guy who's a clubhouse leader and is a really fun player to watch, fiery competitor. He's a winning type of player, and I think the Cubs would be a team that would really benefit from somebody that can kind of be a leader in their young clubhouse, especially with some of the departures they're going to have. And like Wilson Contreras, kind of being their team leader up until now. And he, 6 years, 150. I think it's going to be something similar to that Javi Baez / Trevor Story type contract range. So
Yeah, so I had Dansby going to the Phillies with a really similar deal, 6 years, $145 million. For me, Dansby makes a lot more sense for a team like the Phillies because they we've talked about their infield defense. And what this allows is it allows Stott to really kind of focus on second base. You get a good defensive shortstop at there with the Phillies and really try and solidify that infield defense. Bohm has been sketchy. He showed he showed a little bit of um, progress, I should say, on the defensive side, but still has his moments. And I think getting a shortstop like Dansby that can really help lock down that side of the field defensively, and then add him into that lineup where if he's able to produce anywhere close to what was able to do this year, if he's able to hit 270 around there, hit 20 to 25 homers, steal some bases there. I mean, that could be a really good fit for the Phillies team that we just saw make the World Series, but help solidify that defense a little bit more. You mentioned the career year defensively. His defensive value per Fangraphs, his best season was 9.6 before this year. This year it was 21.4. So I don't know how sustainable that level of that quite is. But Dansby's a very solid player that would fit a team like the Phillies really well. And I'm just not sure that the Braves are going to do it because they've made a habit of locking up their young guys or locking up their talent before it ever reaches the free agency market. And they haven't done it with Dansby. And it just feels a lot kind of like that Freddie Freeman story from last year where like the guy probably wants to go back, should go back, and I'm just not quite sure that it's going to happen.
Yeah, and remember, one other thing with that too, it's the same agent. And the Braves had a lot of issues with Casey Close last year and the Freddie Freeman, regardless of what kind of issues they actually were, because there's been a lot of debate about that. But it's the same agent, so I'd be very. I wouldn't be shocked if he ended up signing back with the Braves because he really wants to go back there. But I think he would probably take a discount if he did that. I just don't know if that's going to happen. So
potentially. Well, David,
that's where I've got him going. But that being said, I have a player comp for Dansby Swanson. I feel like he is on a similar trajectory to Marcus Semien, where he went from being a guy who was known for hitting somewhat inconsistently, but being a really valuable glove in the field, to being a superstar hitter. Semien went to being a superstar hitter over a couple of years. After his first kind of breakout year, he then went and in 2021 was an MVP candidate. I think Dansby's got that kind of transformative power, which is not really something that anyone else in this class has shown off, where Dansby's launch angles and exit velocities are just, they're sky high. And his biggest weakness seems to be the whiff. But Semien was able to, correlate all his skills into a 45 home run season. I think Dansby's got that kind of power. I think his athleticism with the removal of the pitch clock allows him to be maybe the number 2 in terms of like stolen bases in this class, where, we don't really know the impact of those additional stolen bases, but I really believe that overall the numbers are going to go way up, where we're going to see a lot more guys at 30, 40 stolen bases. And I think the top end guys are going to be at 50 plus. Because pitchers can't throw over after one pickoff move. So there's going to be a lot of big leads, a lot of stolen bases, I think more than we're really anticipating at this point. The Braves are the last team, I think, that is going to be willing to spend big. I don't know if the Red Sox or the Cardinals would be willing to throw $200 million at a player at this point. I think they'll be trying to get in at the 150 to 180 range. So that's why I have my 4 teams that are getting a shortstop as the Phillies, Dodgers, Cubs, and Braves. And I have the Braves grabbing Dansby at 8 years for $195 million. Just a little bit under what Bogart's got, kind of ordering those out nicely. But I think Dansby if Dansby went to the Cubs at 6 years, 150, I'd be absolutely elated. Because that's a pretty solid deal for the Cubs in my mind, because I think that would allow them to go out and get a big pitcher potentially. So, yeah.
And you mentioned I think he's on the Trevor Story track, not the Marcus Semien track, but that's kind of just He's a volatile
Hey,
player.
that works. I mean,
Yeah, he's a volatile player. I mean, he's just
yeah.
he could go. There's a lot of different ranges of where he could end up. So
Well, let's go ahead and stick with the Cubs theory there, and we'll stick with Wilson Contreras, the top catcher on the market this year. Will get the qualifying offer. Has already announced that he's going to decline that, and the preliminary interest so far has been from the Cardinals and the Tigers, and it looks like two of us have that. So, David, where do you have him going?
Well, I'm willing to part with Wilson Contreras. I have been not his biggest fan. He's very clunky behind the plate. Just not a good pitch blocker. Cannon for an arm. Not a good pitch framer. Doesn't really call a good game. Like whenever Yan Gomes came in this year, the Cubs pitchers were raving about how great Yan Gomes was at calling games, which is like something they would have only known because Wilson Contreras is not good at it. So, I think I've got Wilson going to the Cardinals because of that early chatter. But I think his market, I think he should have taken the qualifying offer. His market is not going to be all that great. I have him getting 20 million. I just don't know if he's going to be really getting that because we saw the Cubs try to trade him at the deadline and be unable to do so for anything of value. The fact that they're getting that second round pick back is nice, but they're letting him go because of that game calling stuff, and I genuinely don't know. I mean, the Tigers do make some sense, but he won't get more per year, I think, than the qualifying offer, and we both have him at 20 million a year. That's just that's right at the qualifying offer deal. So, it's just a risk to grab a catcher with such negative defensive value.
Yeah, for Contreras, it's right above it. I think the qualifying is like 19.3, so I have him going to the Tigers. Even though he's a qualifying offer guy, I don't think the Tigers would lose their pick because I think it's sixth overall. So I think at least the top 10 pick, they'd lose one of their later round, the second round pick there. And I have same thing, 5 years, 100 million. Don't know that it makes a ton of sense for the Tigers, but we heard the interest there today, and I just said, okay, well, why not? Like, I don't think that Wilson will go to the Cardinals. I mean, I could be wrong, but I just don't know if being the Cubs player and how emotional he's got there, if he's going to want to jump to the Cardinals side of that rivalry, if that even plays a factor. But, maybe the Tigers and having a guy like Javi Baez, playing him up to that team and to that front office, maybe that does something for him. But Matt, what do you have going for Wilson Contreras?
yeah, I mean, I honestly had no idea. So I just patted back to the Cubs because I was just sitting here thinking, why would you not trade him? But I mean, if you didn't want to keep him, but I don't know. I mean, I agree with David and Damien. I don't think his market's going to be what he's hoping it will be because of, like you said, just not a great defensive catcher. And while he's got a good bat, it's not like the type of bat that you could stick in, at the DH and be real happy with it. Like if you're paying him to be a DH, you're not going to pay him a somewhere with 18 to 20 million dollars. It feels a little bit like a part-time catcher / DH role is what he would end up being. And I mean, I don't know. I had him go back to the Cubs just because I couldn't think of another team that would fit with him, and he's kind of been a leader there, I guess, and he's been there a long time. So, but I imagine that he ends up going somewhere else. I just couldn't think of who it might be. So,
yeah, and he's a good bat for a catcher.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
guess that's the way to say it.
Yeah, he's a good bat for a catcher, but like if you want to throw him in a corner outfield or a DH spot, he's still a good bat, but it's like you're thinking more in that he's more in that second tier. Like, you kind of talk about some of the other free agents out there, like that are kind of corner outfield DH, like a Mitch Haniger. Is he really good? Would he really be a better if you're signing him for like a corner outfield DH spot? Is he really better than Mitch Haniger? Probably not. He's probably about the same.
He is better than Mitch Haniger by a significant amount, but yeah,
maybe a little bit. It's like. This year he was. Haniger really struggled this year, but
Haniger hasn't played a full season in like 4 years, and Contreras has been able to at least play 120 games for the last like 5. So
yeah, I mean I get that. I'm just saying, like in general, like just if you're talking about who's like while they're on the field production, type thing. I'm not saying that would give them a bigger deal. I'm just saying, like it's a tough market for Contreras, and the good thing going for him is that there really aren't any catching options out there this year other than Contreras. So that is something that's good. That's good for him. So any team that needs a catcher might probably look at him
Yeah,
closely. So
it's like Contreras and then Christian Vasquez, I
yeah,
think, are really the two. So, um, but anyways, let's go ahead and move on to the Mets. We'll go back over there, and the guy we talked about a little earlier when we were talking about DeGrom, and that's Brandon Nimmo. 30-year-old, going to have the qualifying offer attached. Really broke out over the last couple seasons. Leadoff type guy, high contact, not much power. Where do you guys see him going? We'll go ahead and start with David.
Yeah, I don't see him leaving New York. If the Yankees fail to sign Judge, I think he's a candidate to go play center field for the Yankees. If the Yankees do re-sign Judge, I don't see him leaving New York and going back to the Mets. I
Yankees have
envision,
Bader.
yeah, well, he could play right field too. I just don't see him leaving New York because I don't think any other teams are going to be willing to pay him what the Yankees and the Mets might be willing to. Just a feeling there. And anyway, the point is, I got him like 7 years, 175. That might be real high for a guy who doesn't really hit for power, but he's been pretty reliable and on base. He's had some injury issues. He's the kind of leadoff guy that we've seen teams crave to play the leadoff spot, but then his impact in that New York lineup is kind of it's non-existent, really. He doesn't really he didn't really get on base a lot in the playoffs this year. He wasn't the kind of catalyst to that lineup that they needed him to be. So he scored 102 runs this year. He did what a leadoff guy is supposed to do, but once it came to the playoffs, I guess he was okay this year, but I don't know. I just don't feel like he's going to be making a big impact on the free agent market outside of New York.
Yeah, I think I have him going back to the Mets as well, and I think Matt, you are kind of on the same vein there. Once they said they were prioritizing Diaz and Nimmo, it's going to be hard to see Steve Cohen being outbid if they say they're prioritizing a guy. And I just don't think that they're going to want to let Nimmo walk. I mean, it could even be a deal that we see happen before free agency officially opens, if he's that serious and willing to pay up. I have him at 6 years, 130 million, slightly lower on the AAV, not as many years. But I just think that that's probably a deal for the type of player that Nimmo really is, not being a big contact or a big power guy. And really being a get on base kind of contact type. I don't know if he's going to be up there to get the $25 million a year. So I have him just under about $22 million a year.
yeah, and I mean I think I'm kind of on the same page as Damien and David to a certain level. I just this is the type of thing that I was talking about earlier with Steve Cohen. Steve Cohen's a Mets fan, and as a Mets fan, you kind of value your own players more than maybe you should. And I mean, the contract I've got for him, I think, is probably what he should be getting. But I actually really like Brandon Nimmo. I think he's a good player. I think he's underrated. But I got him at 5 years, 110 back to the Mets. He really fits what they like to do in their lineup. They got a lot of contact guys, high on base guys. Him, Jeff McNeil, Lindor to a certain level, Starling Marte, a lot of these guys who just don't strike out very much, make a lot of contact. I think that he kind of fits that, and I think he's kind of perfect for their lineup. He's gotten a lot better defensively. He was really bad defensively when he first came up, and he's gotten a lot better in center field. So I think he's a pretty solid player. I think that's probably the best value pickup the Mets have. I think 5 years, 110 could end up being a good contract for him. But he is 30, and he has had some injury issues in the past. But I think he's a pretty good player, and I wouldn't be surprised to see this one end kind of early in the offseason as well.
Absolutely. Well, let's go ahead and we got a couple more here, and we'll go to the one that we pretty much all agree on, and I think it's a pretty synonymous pick around. But that's with Justin Verlander at the age of 40. Obviously, not going to have a qualifying offer attached to him. Coming off Tommy John surgery, just won the World Series with the Houston Astros. I don't see him leaving. I got him at 2 years, $70 million, a $35 million AAV. Just one of those short-term, high AAV type deals. For a guy like Verlander that's going to lead that rotation for the next couple years.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, I don't think he's leaving Houston. He's kind of put his name down in Houston folklore. He's won 2 World Series titles there. Um, I think he says he wants to pitch till he's 45. Don't think anybody's gonna give him 5 years, but I think that the Astros would love to have him back next year, and in order to make sure that that gets done, they'll give him 2 years, and I've got him at 60 million. He is coming off of what's likely to be a Cy Young season, so you know, $30 million a year for a guy, even though he's 40, he's coming off a Cy Young season, and he didn't really show any signs of that being a fluke. And his aging is not. He's kind of in uncharted water. As a recent Tommy John guy who's at 40 years old, so we don't know how long he's going to be effective. But I mean, I couldn't see him leaving Houston after this year, so I think he's going back there.
All right, well, let's go ahead, and David has him right back at the same at the Houston for 250, so 25 million per.
The only question for Verlander is it going to be 1 year or 2 for that deal? It should be right around 25, 30 million, somewhere in there.
I don't think it's even going to be a 1. I think it's a question of will it be 2 or 3. That's honestly it would be like 2 with an option for a third is what I'm thinking.
Man.
Yeah,
I think it's more in line for that. If he does have the option for a year, yeah, then it might be a little lower if he has the option. But anyways, let's go ahead and transition over to the last guy we'll talk about, and it's in the first base market. I guess with Anthony Rizzo declining his qualifying offer, he's maybe the top, or probably the top first baseman out there. But before we're going to go with Rizzo. We were going to talk about Jose Abreu. 36-year-old first baseman, was with the White Sox. Seems like there's been a lot of rumblings that he doesn't want to go back to the White Sox. If that's clubhouse reasons or front office behind the scenes things we don't know about. But been some rumors already about where he might go and some potential fits. But David, where do you have Jose Abreu going?
I had to get put on board to this, but I got him as a Cub, and I have only heard the Cubs are very, very interested in Jose Abreu. I think he's very likely to be one of those first signings. He's not eligible for the qualifying offer, I don't believe, and I think he signed it last year, if I'm not mistaken. But either way, I don't foresee him getting more than a 2 or a 3 year deal. He'll go for about 20 million. And he was like a 4-win player last year. He was just really, really good. His exit velocity numbers were the same, even though his home run numbers were down. And in 2020, he hit more home runs in Wrigley Field than like half of the Cubs team, and he played 3 games there. So I think he hits really well in Wrigley Field. He's a really good fit. The Cubs have a lefty coming up in Matt Mervis, so they're going to probably want to pair him with a righty. And Jose Abreu is the best available righty. He's going to be not looking for more than 1 or 2 years, probably maybe 3, but you might be able to even save a little bit of money per year if you sign him to 3. And I don't think you're feeling bad about that, given his skill set and the consistency he showed over the last several years. He's a guy you plug and play at first base. I envision that the teams that lose a first baseman, like the Yankees, like the White Sox, will be looking out for a guy like Jose Abreu, but from everything I've seen, I think the Cubs are going to jump on him really early in the offseason.
Yeah, I hadn't really heard the rumors about him leaving the White Sox before I put in my prediction, so I just figured he'd probably like to be back with the White Sox as a guy who he's been there his entire career. The fans really like him there, and I mean, I could see if he doesn't want to be with the White Sox because of some clash with ownership or something, I could definitely see him going to the Cubs because I really think he just he's been in that city forever, so. That's kind of the only place he's been since he came over from Cuba. So I think he's a good player, and I would be, I think whoever picks him up, I think it's gonna be a really solid pickup. So.
Yeah, for me, I had him going to Houston on a 2-year, $38 million deal. They're losing Yuli Gurriel as a free agent, and they traded for Trey Mancini. He's also a free agent. You get a good right-handed power bat in there, what he would be able to do with the Crawford boxes. They don't seem to really care about age too much. Still seems like a good player overall, and he seems like a guy who will want to try and chase playoff baseball. will want to try and chase a championship. What better place to go and do that with the team that just won the World Series, has been there the past handful of years consistently deep in the playoffs, and has a hole at first base, and it will be willing to want to try and fill that. They could potentially bring back Yuli Gurriel, but and maybe even Trey Mancini. But at this point, I mean, if you had a chance to get a guy like Jose Abreu, who's probably better than both of those, and fill that gap there and not have to worry about it, I think that makes a ton of sense.
For what it's worth, a report came out this evening from a Chicago writer, Bruce Levine, that said the Cubs are expected to have strong interest in Jose Abreu, and it has like a very specifically like a 2-year deal may make the best of both worlds for the Cubs who want to keep that deal to fewer years, more money, and Abreu who wants more of a guarantee. This feels like a match like. When it was kind of presented to me, I was like, yeah, that kind of feels like it's going to be a thing that happens. So I don't know. Maybe if I have a confidence level, if the way you do like March Madness, if you have a confidence level on all these picks, I think this one would be one of my more confident picks. It just feels right.
Well, the beauty of it is we shall wait and see what will happen throughout the offseason. We'll hear a lot of rumors. Most of them will probably not be true. We'll hear a ton of mystery teams. We'll see a ton of action. It will be pretty exciting off season as we're getting ready to jump into it. One thing from us that is going to impact you guys listening is that during the off season, we're going to go towards a every other week schedule, most likely. If some big names sign throughout the week, we will we'll jump in and do an episode that week if we get the Aaron Judge or the Jacob deGroms or whatever. We'll do that. But the plan is originally to jump to every other week. So as of right now, the next episode that we plan on recording would be the 22nd of November. But anything else that you guys want to wrap up on or hit on as we jump into the start of free agency in just a couple days?
Yeah, this was a really fun season this year. I think that um, we started off with a lot of talk about the CBA and how baseball really didn't need to lose any momentum from the year previous in 2021, which I thought was a great season as well. And I think things just kind of continued to go in the right direction this year. And obviously there's going to be a lot of talk this offseason about these free agents and stuff. I think that the trade market will pick up at some point too. So, don't forget that there's also, a lot of high priority, trade targets out there too. You might see, we haven't even talked about him, but maybe a guy like Shohei Ohtani gets moved. I don't really expect him to, just because I don't know. It seems like a difficult thing to do, but Shohei Ohtani could be on the market. I mean, and some other guys like a Willie Adames or somebody who is probably close to these top 10 free agent type guys. There's other pieces out there that can move to. I think you're going to see this in the next couple weeks. You're going to see a decent amount of free agents sign early. I think that worked out a lot last year with the guys who signed really early. They seemed to be very happy with having signed early. They were kind of forced into it last year because of the lockout impending. And obviously that's not coming this year. So I think a lot of them might want to get settled early now. And it'll be interesting. There's some other interesting free agents we didn't talk about today. You got some of the other relievers. You've got guys like the pitcher from Japan, Kodai Senga, who's coming in. That might be a really really interesting one to watch. Who could get a high dollar deal. You got some of these guys who are some of these middle to not top of the rotation arms, but kind of middle tier arms like a Taiwan Walker, Chris Bassett, Nate Eovaldi, those types of guys that might be interesting to see which ones of those might get valued higher than others. And then you've got a couple guys like JD Martinez and Michael Conforto who are kind of prove it deal type guys, like 1 year prove it deals, but they could also they have the high end ceiling to be super high impact wherever they go. So those might be interesting to see where they end up going. But I definitely think this is going to be an interesting off season, and I'm excited for it. I'm ready to see what happens here in the next couple weeks.
Yeah, and I think the trade market is the big one. I think that we really can't know about, and so if any huge trades hit, we'll jump on. I know the Motani thing was shut down by the Angels GM, which is really just another way of saying if you're going to trade for him, you're going to have to give us your entire farm and two of your minor league teams, like stadiums and stuff. But that being said, there's other starting pitchers available. I think, we've talked kind of at length about a number of those teams. Any team that misses out on DeGrom and Rodon and maybe in essence Verlander, though I don't know that anybody is pegging him away from the Astros. Those are going to be looked at. I think Pablo Lopez, maybe Shane Bieber, if the Guardians don't like that arbitration price, he could be on the move, and then obviously Ohtani, as well as maybe some guys we haven't heard about yet. So just keep our ears peeled, and we'll be on if any of these big trades hit.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's been a tiny bit of talk about a guy like Brandon Woodruff too. It's another.
Oh yeah, the Brewers might trade a starter as well. Yeah.
Yep. So it's going to be a pretty interesting offseason, and we will be here to wrap it all up for you guys. So thank you guys for tuning in to this episode of the Batflip Podcast, and we'll see you guys in 2 weeks.